Women in One Piece are usually connected to themes of youth, family, and death. Higurashi was super old, and we were explicitly shown her turn into some youthful lady. Kureha is the oldest character in the series, but obsessed with the secret of youth. Sugar has a broken devil fruit ability, and she appears as a child even though she isn't. Carmel was also really old, but then was supposedly eaten by Big Mom, a character who, despite being a mature woman, has major childish regressions and aging issues. Big Mom strongly resembles Bonnie in tons of ways, and that's another female tied to aging. Pakin is an old lady who's connected to youth by Stussy. I could go on, but you get the picture. With Lily, we have a very old Nefertari figurehead contrasted with a very young Nefertari figurehead, as if Lily's will has been inherited by Vivi. The painting that we saw of Lily recently in 1116 was contrasted by a portrait of Cobra smiling, which was during his funeral. This picture from the St. Brice certainly seems to imply this familiar looking lady also met her end. So what's with all these chicks in paintings going missing, or even worse? Maybe these tie to the different wives we know Emu had. This painting theory goes wild, so I'm very excited for this. Hello, as always, it's Den, and today we have another spicy theory for everyone, where we dive into ideas around how, if you're a woman in the One Piece world, you should never get your portrait done, as well as these ladies' ties to Emu's actual powers. Is Lily preserved through a painting, or is she more of a Horcrux for Emu? As always, there's a little extra spice towards the end of the video, so stick around for that. Make sure you like and sub, and let's get into this. So, is it possible Emu has the power to put someone in a painting? Drawing parallels to the story The Picture of Dorian Gray, where Dorian's portrait reflects his soul's corruption while he remains physically unchanged, Emu's ability may allow a painting to capture and interact with a person's essence, potentially affecting their state outside the artwork. Like Dorian Gray, it could mean that the damage inflicted on Emu's body is stored within the painting as opposed to Emu's actual person, making her invulnerable. Viola was featured in some portraits in Dressrosa. She has the Jiro Jiro Nomi, or the Glare fruit, which is a paramecia type devil fruit that allows her to see through solid objects and read the minds of others by creating a mental image of what they are thinking. We see something similar with the Memo fruit eaten by Charlotte Pudding. This is another paramecia devil fruit, but it allows her to manipulate memories by creating and erasing them. Pudding can alter how people perceive events by changing their memories, effectively rewriting their history or reality as perceived by others. This works similarly to Sugar's devil fruit and what people remember of the toys that she's turned people into. This all could suggest that a side effect of Lily being trapped in a painting is that people have forgotten about her. The implications of such a power in the One Piece world are profound. For example, a character like Emu might have used the ability to trap powerful enemies, conserve their abilities, and protect important secrets, all by hiding them within paintings, safe from anyone else's reach. Additionally, in the story, the concept of being trapped inside a painting is something that has already been featured in many different forms. The Straw Hats were caught off guard in chapter 716 by Giola when she turned them into a painting before being beaten by Soul King Brook. Is Oda suggesting here that Brook is more soulful than Giola, I wonder? Mont Dior's had enough people trapped in her book as pictures. There are other mediums also, such as Sugar turning people into toys, as I mentioned, and Big Mom trapping souls in inanimate objects. The foundation for art-based powers is evident with Miss Golden Week in chapter 184, where her painting trap ability manipulates emotions via painted colours, and also with Kanjuro Kurozumi in chapter 1032, who wields the Fude Nomi or brush fruit, allowing his drawings to come to life. Now bear that in mind, that the traitor Kanjuro had the brush fruit. Now I'll touch on that in a second. So we can see it's completely within the One Piece style to see paintings that physically trap people or emotions or objects within them. The process could involve painting a detailed image of the target or marking them somehow, which upon activation by a command or touch pulls the target into a painted dimension, drawing inspiration from Van der Dekker's Meito Nomi or Target fruit, as well as Charlotte Brulé's Mirror Nomi. Portraits in One Piece serve as powerful symbols of identity, will and legacy, and are often intertwined with the themes of will and death. This illustrates how characters' influences and aspirations persist beyond their lifetimes, inspiring future generations and shaping the narrative, adding to the whole checkered fate motif Oda uses. In other words, when you see a portrait or a framed picture of a mysterious character in One Piece, it's important and likely symbolizes something key to the real truth behind the world. The Saint Brice features one of the eeriest portraits we've ever seen in OP, depicting a woman much like the one on Kuma's Bible, but with a spear through her head. Portus de Rouge, the mother of Portus de Ace, has her portrait seen during Ace's flashback in Marineford. Belmia, Nami's adoptive mother, is depicted in a portrait at Nami's house, symbolizing her influence on Nami's life. The Vinsmoke Sora, Sanji's mother, appears in a portrait at the Germa 66 castle, crucial to Sanji's backstory. Scarlet, the wife of Kyros and mother of Rebecca, is shown in a portrait in flashbacks during the Dressrosa arc. Otahime, pivotal in Fishman Island's history, is depicted in a portrait at the Ryuga Palace. Carmel and Big Mom are bound by Soul, which was encapsulated by the photo frame smashing, causing Big Mom to freak out. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? All of these ladies are unfortunately unalive. This is not a coincidence either. No doubt the reason connects to why Emu had so many wives and why Lily went missing in the first place, and also why we see a portrait of her. The way Oda showed Emu staring at the painting is ambiguous, but gives off some feeling of concern or regret in my opinion, but also indicates that there's more to this and that Emu has a plan that connects to Lily. So in summary, it's probably best to say that the panel that we see where Emu's looking at the painting gives off a thoughtful vibe, you know, it looks like Emu's thinking about something. Earlier, I mentioned Giola of the Don Quixote Pirates and Emu, the mysterious figure atop the world government hierarchy, who both appear initially unrelated but may actually share deeper connections through their respective abilities. Introduced in chapter 715, Giola wields the Eto Eto Nomi, or Art Fruit, allowing her to transform people and objects into surreal artistic forms, symbolizing manipulation of perception and reality. We saw one of the absolute wildest panels in the history of One Piece, which still to this day baffles most fans. What makes this so important is the fact it's basically a huge hint from Oda regarding what occurred during the Void Century, namely that the Eastern Kingdom, which pertains to Luffy, blocked out the sun against the Western Kingdom, which relates to celestial dragons. The reason why East appears on the left here is like the seas in the One Piece world has been flipped. Oda also include words like immortal and heaven in Giola's techniques, so it's pretty clear here that the connections to Emu and the whole heavenly divine themes going on at the top of Marijois are very intentional by Oda. Art serves as a medium of communication during the story too, such as Wano with the message about where the raid was taking place and the picture of Luffy that gave the time the Straw Hats needed to reunite. Maybe there is a message within the painting of Lily, such as some historical truth that acts as a puzzle piece in the grander whole scheme of things. So the idea would be maybe there's some sort of information or voiceable things in there that Emu isn't aware of, and that might help resolve the true history later on in the story. Art also functions as a tool of manipulation, exemplified by Miss Goldenweek's paint trap I mentioned earlier. So maybe a truth has been hidden within the painting, even from Emu. We have seen people interact with souls in strange ways in the story, so the Straw Hats potentially could still discover this truth. Brook's music, for example, influences people's souls, even causing them to fall asleep, or dream, you could say. This is actually foreshadowed, which I talked about months before Lily's reveal in a video where I showed Vivi playing a harp in a patch of water lilies and explained how this could indicate her soothing the dead. Maybe the Straw Hats need to enter the painting to save the princess in a nod to Mario 64, or perhaps the painting will be brought to life like we've seen before. So in other words, if there is a truth stuck inside the painting or some information that Lily's will holds, then there are ways that the Straw Hats or other characters could interact with the painting and maybe take that information or learn from it. Amongst all the possibilities, one does stand out to me, however. Lily's eyes are not looking great in the portrait, and we know at this point eyes are the window to the soul. So whoever is in that painting, I'm confident is no longer alive in the sense of your standard soul. However, they are, according to how memory works in One Piece, as people are said to only die when they are forgotten. So my thoughts are, Lily is not alive, however part of her sustains Emu to this day, like a Horcrux. Maybe it's instead the duty of the Straw Hats to destroy the painting and put Lily's will to rest, as opposed to rescuing her. This could involve Zoro becoming the king of the underworld to release the hold over Lily. In turn, this leads to Emu using Vivi's will as a substitute, which results in Law potentially giving up his life to save her via the OP Nomi, as Vivi is needed for the dawn to last. If this does happen, this is going to be super, super emotional. And I know a lot of people probably haven't thought about stuff like that, but Law isn't going to make it, and the sacrifice has to go to someone, so why not Vivi? Alright, so with all this in mind, let's summarize where we're at. Emu has a connection to the ancient Nefertari princess, Queen Lily. Lily eventually goes missing. There's an eerie painting of Lily in Marijua, and Emu looks at it from time to time thoughtfully. The eyes are shaded out, and most of the portraits of the women in the One Piece world are women that are no longer alive and are not coming back. I think the painting provides a use to Emu, and Emu is somehow bound to it, perhaps adding to the reason Emu doesn't leave Marijua. I think by destroying, or maybe more likely releasing the painting from its curse, it will detach Emu from it like a Horcrux and leave Emu more vulnerable. But this definitely is not all. This is in fact just the beginning, because what if it's not just paintings? This is hinted at in chapter 906 during the Reverie arc, where we discover a massive Straw Hat in cold storage under Marijua. I do want to make a point that 3-day trip after reading the spoilers for 1119 last night mentioned that Emeth, the Iron Giant, could be the original owner of the Straw Hat, which is very interesting, particularly as the giant went up to Marijua at one point, was triggered to go to Marijua, so it's possible. However, back to the point. Could it be that there are other relics, not just paintings, that hold the wills of key figures hidden around the world? Think about Yoru, something I've long since speculated to be Joy Boy's sword. Think about the song Bink's Saki, and the information the lyrics could hold in its ties to Brook. Think about the symbols of the Ancient Kingdoms that we've seen in Wano, Alabasta, Zoe, etc. Great ships like the Noah, Maxim and Pluton. Are these all pieces of a fragmented ancient history that need to be freed the same way Lily does? In the same conversation that I mentioned earlier with 3-Day Trip, 3 also mentioned the idea that Joy Boy's original flame, like his original will, may have been split up in amongst his crew and amongst artifacts and stuff, and it's in bringing all of these together in one piece that we can rekindle the flame of Nika and liberation. And although I haven't got any decent script written up for anything like that right now, we will discuss that more in future videos and on stream, so check it out. Okay, but now let's look at some other forms of painting Emu is connected to. Turn your thoughts to the theories concerning Emu drawing the X over Lalesia on the map. Many have speculated since seeing this that Oda was hinting Emu controls some part of reality using ink or a map. By crossing out Lalesia, it physically manifested the destruction of Lalesia. Additionally, we see shadowy or inky shapes with the Gorosei and the arrows used to kill Cobra. This motif also fits with the theories about Luffy breaking the fourth wall, as Emu may influence the actual ink on the page. This distortion of reality fits well as a counterpart to the protagonist Luffy's sun god Nika Devil Fruit, as well as the idea that the authors are also artists when it comes to manga. We know Oda's got huge ties to Toriyama and Dragon Ball, and we have seen little drawings in Dragon Ball volumes where Goku's breaking the panels using his Kamehameha, so it's an interesting idea. If this is the case though, why doesn't Emu just cross out Laugh-Tale or Wano or Dressrosa? Well, there are probably some conditions if someone's will is embedded into their portrait or tied to an object, as we see with Sugar's toys who are forgotten, and Big Mum's constituents that have a contract tied to their lifespan. It's possible this reflects a deal made between Emu and the Celestial Dragons or some other party, perhaps meaning Emu's bound to a set of rules, similar to what we saw in the ABC series Lost with the candidates. On the other hand, as opposed to a contract, these limitations could be caused by physical properties of the One Piece world, such as how Sea Stone negates Devil Fruit abilities. If this is the case, it would make sense why Emu may need to bind important figures to an object of sorts, and could even be the reason for the OP Nomi's top-end bounty. Maybe Emu really wants this Devil Fruit so she can revive Lily or revive other old relics. Okay guys, so that is a brief overview of everything we have on the painting. If you do want more, it's a subject we've covered on stream and we talk about daily in the Discord, so make sure you jump in. Maybe think about the wives and how the wives connect to all of these strange portraits in One Piece of women that are unfortunately not with us anymore or no longer in the story anymore. If you enjoyed the channel or the video particularly, consider becoming a member and requesting some exclusive content or features, or joining our Patreon and having some influence on our creative decisions. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you've liked and subbed. Look after yourself, be yourself, free yourself, and if you've made it this far, you've just won a free portrait done by Giola. So just hit me up with the deets in the comments and we'll book their appointment ASAP. Much love, peace. Ever notice how many devil fruits are not actually eaten intentionally?
No way!
Luffy accidentally ate his devil fruit. Boa and her sisters were forced to eat devil fruits. Buggy accidentally ate a devil fruit too. Momo ate a devil fruit because he was hungry, and that's just to name a few. This demonstrates how not everyone eats a devil fruit with the intention of gaining power. Instead, some of these people seem fated to do so, which could be in part why Emu usually sees these people as enemies, but I'll touch on that in a sec. What's most interesting here is the fact that devil fruits are super old. In other words, they're potentially relics of the true history, and as such, they may hold key information that might flip the global system. And these aren't the only relics either. We have poneglyphs, and they hide one of the greatest truths in the world, the location of Laugh-Tale. So the question is, why is the past such a secret, and how does Emu use the true history to rule over the world? Every 1,000 years, the One Piece world is ravaged by natural disasters, abolishing the current status quo by destroying and shifting land and sea. This puts the global order in disarray, both for the geography and for the people. This means every 1,000 years is almost self-contained, as histories and technology are wiped out under the reoccurring global cataclysm. If this is the case, the world likely has its own forgotten history. People forget their true heritage, and Emu can suppress people taking their rightful place. Emu probably originated pre-Void Century, which would mean that Emu has an idea of the true history of the world, as she may have been present during this time. Hey, it's Denden, and today we're looking into another spicy theory. As always, there's a little bonus towards the end of the video, so stick around for that, and make sure you like and sub, and let's get into this. If the world and the majority of its histories were wiped out, then people would be left with no idea who they are, why they are where they are, and how the world used to be. But what if there was someone that stayed above all of these global disasters, kept an eye on the coming and going of histories, and maybe even orchestrated some of these events? But how could one person control the entire globe for such a long time? If Emu knew of a global cleansing or expected it somehow, then she may have planned to capture the newly formed world as it emerges from the aftermath. This is achieved through the extension of the world government, propaganda and oppression, which creates a dream that encapsulates everyone. The perception of the people, whether it is their belief in gods or their fear of the world government, keeps humanity and its progress at bay, most of all technology. In turn, this has created a nightmare from which the world's people cannot escape, and Emu uses this nightmare to solidify her own position at the top. However, all is not lost. Strangely enough, oppression seems to breed desperation, which leads to imagination, hope, and change, and now it appears like Emu's time may almost be up. But how will this unfold, and why is this the case? One Piece has a super interesting hidden motif, subtly portrayed since the very first chapter. This motif is how Emu has managed to keep herself a secret as well as rule the world this whole time. The motif I'm talking about is traumatized children, believe it or not. We often see references to sheep or lambs, which are metaphors for innocence and youth. These lambs seem to play an integral part in Emu's plan, as well as how global events unfold. We see this symbolically in the cover story where Robin reads a book to alpacas, causing them to fall asleep and dream bubbles that float up. The reason behind this is that these special individuals have a particularly strong will, dream, or destiny, usually accompanied with a traumatic backstory. I've previously discussed yokai at length, which is just one example of how Oda shows us this motif. Kuma is a great example and is very relevant currently. He lost both of his parents due to the ruthlessness of the celestial dragons and suffered intense bullying and harassment as a child, just to hold his faith and be blessed with the hands of liberation in a church littered with Joy Boy's symbol. I've been covering this symbol for years now, so feel free to check out older videos to find out more. Similarly, his daughter Bonnie inside the same church willed herself to be older, causing a physical change to her body. Both these cases demonstrate how the imagination of young people can be very powerful in One Piece. It might be that imagination is in fact the key to defeating Emu. This would explain the focus on children in the One Piece story, as children are known to have imagination that is far more open than adults. This has been covered in other media as well, such as The Shining and other Stephen King novels. Children are commonly seen from the very first chapter all the way up to present story. Lamb or Sheep's House, depending on the translation, was Mother Carmel's orphanage. It harboured abandoned and abused children, just to be sold into the service of the world government. We see here that Carmel is no longer Sister Carmel, but instead is now called Mother Carmel. And furthermore, the orphanage's name refers to the innocent children, all of which adds to our motif of oppressed kids. Little is known about the identity of these young orphans' backgrounds, which does actually include Big Mum, except for a small clue that we got about one, suggesting that he was once a prince. Despite hints towards the children being eaten alongside Carmel, it appears they can be seen years later in the story under different branches of the world government, for example in Impel Down and Cypherpole. So, some of these oppressed children go on to rise up through the world government ranks, while others are cast aside and shut away, such as the Impel Down prison guards. Continuing with the Autumn theme, parents are often absent in One Piece, as Marco explained with Whitebeard's backstory. The flashback depicts war-torn orphans, with Oda explicitly stating this is a product of conflict. In the background we see someone resembling a young Zebek, sat in the same position as young Blackbeard when he was crying under the moon. Time and again it's hinted the world wars seem to create many traumatized and lost orphans who grow up to deal with this either by liberating the weak or by ruling them. For example with Dofi, Law, Rebecca, Shirahoshi, just as some examples of this. These war-torn orphans are who Oda is referring to when he says sheep, and it's these people that seem to be able to meaningfully affect change in the world. So by taking these sheep under the wing of the world government, it's one way that Emu reduces the threat that they might become. Cypherpole is probably the best example of this. By tying the orphans of Lamb's House with Cypherpole Zero, we discover that the children are used from a young age. Not only this though, Cypherpole members are often shown to be related or descended in particular from each other. Examples of this can be seen with Spandine. A couple of Cypherpole relatives were revealed at the O'Hara incident. One of them wasn't revealed but looks very much like Who's Who. The orphan from Lamb's House that's wearing a mask resembles Maha in the future, however in the past resembles a character that was shown to be a god's knight. So here, as I say, we can see nepotism. It's being kept within the system. This is potentially how the world government maintains control over the elite and secretive Cypherpole, whose duties concern guarding the world's secrets at some points. They operate behind the scenes to neutralize threats before they can gain momentum. For instance, CP9's mission in Water 7 to acquire the blueprints of the ancient weapon Pluton demonstrates their role in eliminating preemptive threats. This branch of Cypherpole was persecuted for their failure against the Straw Hats and were pursued all the way to a mysterious island, which I personally assume is Aegis. Their leader, Rob Lucci, is said to have been accompanied by his mysterious bird friend Hattori from a very young age, and I believe we'll see this revealed to be another form of monitoring and control. Also, hints that the control is not working as well as it used to can be seen in Egghead, where Lucci directly disobeys some of the highest orders that can be given when he attacks Luffy. So by controlling and observing young prospects, Emu can recruit them into the fold and have them join her cause, as opposed to going against her. They also do this with pirates, forming alliances with powerful crews through the Shishubukai system, which has, to be fair, since been abolished. This not only helped in dealing with other pirate threats, but also ensures that these powerful individuals do not become enemies of the state. We saw that even Mihawk eventually got tired of dealing with the constant attacks by the world government. Now, I mentioned Cypherpol controlling information. This is true to the point where they're trusted with extremely secretive tasks like the kidnapping of Nefertari Vivi, or, for example, the escorting of the Gomu. This is risky for Emu, as the truth may be leaked, which is what we saw with the Gear 5 Luffy bounty poster, despite the Gorosei demanding not to make the image public. In addition to this, we saw Shanks take the Gomu, which is a fundamental moment in the timeline, and is a brilliant example of how losing control of the true history of the world could really cause some problems for the world government. This leads us to another method by which Emu controls the world: the flow of information, as well as pushing misinformation. This encapsulates the entire globe in a controlled narrative. The Truman Show is a very popular movie that is pretty much about this exact idea. In the One Piece story, however, we see countless examples of this too, from being forgotten in Level 6 Impel Down to scrubbing the true histories of the world through destroying the ancient kingdom. The world government extensively uses propaganda to maintain control and manipulate public perception. They control the flow of information through media outlets like the World Economic Journal, ensuring that the news presented to the public aligns with their narrative. This propaganda portrays the government as a benevolent and just authority, while framing pirates, revolutionaries, and anyone else who opposes them as dangerous criminals and enemies of the peace. The real truth, however, is currently, under the world government, there is no peace, only fake peace, making Emu a fraud. This is done by controlling the narrative, such as the Vinsmokes acting as the villains of the World Economic Journal comic strip Sora, Warrior of the Sea. Nolan's truth was essentially covered up by Nolan's Book of Lies, despite the stories being true. The Bragmen stories are portrayed as being exaggerated stories, thus the word brag in Bragmen, although through the course of the Straw Hat's adventure, we realise these stories are largely true. Interestingly, these were actually amongst the books of Ohara saved by Sol. Now, the author's name of the Bragmen tales is said to be Louis R. Note, and while despite some of the biggest brains in our Discord trying to crack for years why Oda chose this name, we still don't have much idea, except for one small thing. The only anagram that can be made from the entire name is a resolution, perhaps hinting that these extraordinary stories are the resolution to escaping the terrible clutches of the world government. Lastly, more direct cases of this propaganda happened recently when we saw the news saying Luffy kidnapped Vegapunk, when in fact Vegapunk asked Luffy to take him. Big News Morgans is Oda's counterpart to this by spreading his own propaganda. There is another form of propaganda the world government uses all the time, however. Emu uses bounty posters as a method to demonize pirates and other individuals who oppose their authority. By issuing these posters, they brand these figures as dangerous criminals, placing hefty rewards on their heads to incentivize their capture or elimination by people such as bounty hunters or the general public. We see the effect of this reversed recently with Cross Guild, who are now putting bounties on the world government's head, as if they were pirates. This practice not only paints the targets as menaces to society, but also justifies, for example, with the bounty posters, the government's pursuit and harsh treatment of the individuals. It serves to instill fear and compliance among citizens, discouraging them from sympathizing with or aiding those who challenge the government's rule, thereby maintaining their control and suppressing rebellion. The idea of demonizing is pretty literal in the One Piece story, as we know from Joy Boy being called a devil, for example, or fruits being called devil fruits, Robin being referenced as the demon of Ohara. Furthermore, they employ symbols and public ceremonies to reinforce their legitimacy. The execution of Gold D. Roger, the pirate king, was turned into a spectacle to deter piracy and solidify their power. Through these tactics, the world government effectively controls the narrative, ensuring that the majority of the population remains obedient and supportive of their rule, while dissenters are isolated and vilified. I'd like to see it revealed that this is the case with our oversized friend Oars. Oars' tyrannical history is notorious and came to us through the warlord Gecko Moria. It's likely false information, with many theorizing that Oars was an ally or some connection to Joy Boy and moved continents to liberate the oppressed. On the other hand, however, the ancient giant was depicted as a devil from Dante's Inferno during the Thriller Bark arc, so maybe Oda does want us to villainize Oars. Poneglyphs are said to hold the, and I quote, true history of the world. These were made during the Void Century about 900 years ago, which we know Joy Boy was involved in making the poneglyphs from the apology left to Poseidon signed by Joy Boy himself. Now, considering Vegapunk just revealed Joy Boy lived at the end of the Void Century, that gives us our time frame. Where it gets really interesting though is the actual contents of the poneglyphs. This suggests they have a record not of the Void Century, but of what led to the Void Century, potentially even before that. So how is it possible Joy Boy and the other creators of poneglyphs were aware of the true history of flooding was erasing the majority of it every 1,000 years? The scholars of Ohara threatened the world government by researching poneglyphs which could reveal forbidden history. To stop this, the government launched a Buster Call, a massive military operation that destroyed the island and killed nearly all of its inhabitants, ensuring the knowledge remained hidden and showcasing their willingness to use extreme force to maintain their control. Along with the island, the 5,000-year-old Tree of Knowledge was destroyed, also symbolizing the last remnants of the true history being wiped out. This is just one example of the world government using destruction to maintain control, as we saw with Crocus, who ate lead after he nearly named the Ancient Kingdom. During the Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, which posed a significant threat to the 20 kingdoms, who are the precursors to the world government, was destroyed. The details about this kingdom and its knowledge were wiped out to ensure the current regime's dominance and to prevent any resurgence of them as a threat. Anyone associated with this information is disposed of rapidly. We're seeing this all happen again with Vegapunk, who had mentioned multiple times Clover was a good friend of his. But now it's Vegapunk's turn to be fried for looking too deep into secrets that he shouldn't have been. We often see references to cleansing, which ties in here too. And as an example, we saw a purge of young children that had ties to Roger. This is a reflection of what King Herod did in the Bible after hearing the Messiah Jesus would be born and would threaten Herod's kingdom. The world government disposed of many babies as a way to prevent Roger's son from inheriting Roger's defiant legacy. A nice touch from Oda here is that similarly defiant was Rouge, Ace's mother, who impossibly held her pregnancy for over a year in order to keep the baby hidden from said purge. This cost her her life, and in an ironic twist, the Marines did eventually kill Ace years later in a public execution designed to undermine Roger's agenda. In Water 7, there was characters that we loved who were involved with the blueprints of Pluton, an ancient weapon. The world government viewed these blueprints as a major threat and deployed Cypherpole 9 to infiltrate and retrieve the blueprints. Through manipulation and assassination attempts, Cypherpole 9 demonstrated the government's strategy of using covert operations to destroy internal threats, which we saw they did by going undercover. One reoccurring example of the world government's destructive tendencies can be seen in the current chapters, where we are witnessing the Buster Call of Egghead. This is due to Vegapunk getting too close to the true history, and in a shocking turnaround, Vegapunk is now broadcasting similar information around the world. So the next method Emu uses to ensure control over the status quo is via taxation. Tributes are paid to the celestial dragons by the allied nations of the world. Despite their taxes being extortionate at times, people often do their best to pay in order to avoid trouble. The price of not paying the tax can be death, and even the destruction of entire islands. Arlong had a lot of hatred for human oppression, but then went on to claim a similar tax from the people of Orange Town, depicting how his suffering has led him to be as bad as the Celestials. This is a really good example of how Emu keeps people down and turns them against each other. During this arc, we also see how Marines can be corrupted, even behind the backs of the world government, which is another threat to Emu, as we know that some world government agents aren't loyal to the faction. The negative aspects of taxation are shown clearly by Bakori's rule of the South Blue Island Sorbet Kingdom. Bakori ramped up the taxation in a way that would split the population, leaving the south of the island annexed from the richer north. This reflects how Emu can manipulate regions into a war or poverty, reducing the direct threat to herself, and it does appear that Bakori returned after visiting the world government and implemented the idea based on their advice. Furthermore, we have Jinbei's cover story featuring a subtle reference to a tribute left for a sea god, but I'll leave that more cryptic example for you Giga theorists in the comments to discuss and work out. With Vegapunk's huge reveal to the world, it seems like Emu's time is coming to an end. Sabo recently stated pretty explicitly, who knew hell was at the top of the world, which is the real truth behind the status quo, and Oda showing that someone knows it now. The world government would no doubt relentlessly chase Sabo down, but as fate would have it, they believed he died in the Leisure Strike. This strike revealed once again how information can be intercepted and traced, shown through Sabo's call to the Revolutionary Army. But also, we do know other people that do this, for example Greenbull, who has demonstrated similar vibes with Dendamushi's, including hacking. We know Oda loves his parallels, and when we saw Sabo stumble across Imu, we also saw Wapol, the previous king of Drum Island, catching a glimpse of the world government's biggest secret through a little peephole in the wall of the throne room. On first read, some may be thinking, what the chuff is Imu doing with a little glory hole in the most secret room in the entire world? Well, this could be explained with a parallel, or at least something tied to the event, as it may be that Lily, Joy Boy, or someone else from that era made the hole, or even saw Imu through it. It's definitely something Oda will bring up again, and could be a hint towards how the truth behind the real world was discovered by Joy Boy. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the methods by which Imu does control the world, but let's ask the real question here. Why does Imu actually fear the truth?
Why?
The story indicates that if secrecy is the key to Imu's control, then truth is the key to unlocking that control and freeing the world. We did just see Vivi's missing poster, and Luffy already said he wanted to go save her, but he was stopped by his own crew, so it's looking like Luffy and Imu might clash very soon. Luffy's abilities granted to him by the sun god Nika fruit, which was stolen from Cypher Pole by Shanks, are rooted deep in imagination. Imagination is a powerful tool in One Piece. It can have strong effects on a character's power and can even cause physical change. Usopp and Buggy have great imagination and are often rewarded for it, with Usopp's lies coming true or Buggy magically finding himself escaping a situation just to come out on top. And a quick fun fact, these two characters have actually never met. Anyway, by controlling a person's image of the world, Imu controls someone's imagination in the world. However, under duress, imagination grows. Desires grow. The spark needed to ignite these imaginations is the big reveal to the world of the truth, through Vegapunk's speech. We saw a scene analogous to this with the Revolutionary Army rally, with the posters of Sabo in the background. The bunting shows all the different factions that make up this alliance, and we'll definitely see these guys in action against the world government soon. In chapter 11-16, it was revealed that Joy Boy was the first pirate. Dragon was said to be a marine that became a pirate. This is Oda portraying how marines and pirates are not that different. It's the power above both of these parties that is the true oppressor. The world government uses the marines as a vehicle to dispose of rebellious individuals and suppress those who may become a threat. The irony here is that if you are powerful enough to deny orders and do so, then you're effectively a sword member. Sword is in essence a pirate group of marines. In other words, if the navy and pirates were to join forces, the world government wouldn't stand a chance at resisting. All it would take is the right piece of true information or history to get leaked to bring this alliance about. I theorize we will see Vegapunk's speech trigger a global rebellion. The forces will overwhelm the world governments, and there will be some merger of the two in a greater force. As Imu's forces become weakened, Blackbeard will show up last minute like he always does to third party the situation and take Imu's power for himself. Now, here's something to think about before I leave. There are some people that seem to know a bit more than others, particularly some spicy stuff. And I'm not just talking about Blackbeard. We have Akainu, who listened to Vegapunk's message and seems completely indifferent. We have Sengoku, who definitely knows some of the secrets of the world, and this might connect to the goat that he carries around. Garp somehow knew about the Celestials' field trip, as he called it, to God Valley. Kong obviously knew about this situation too, and seemed to be involved in organise it to some degree. The reason for Zabet going to God Valley is likely down to a significant piece of true or secretive information, and this might also be why Oda has Kuzan defected from the world government. Kuzan might know something too, which I could imagine him passing down to Smoker or Toshigi or someone along them lines. I guess the most significant party that would know a truth is the D clan, but It is interesting that Emu described the declan as a thorn in her side. That doesn't really sound like a big deal, you know, it sounds like a little deal. So maybe Emu isn't actually aware of some of the truth that these people have. We saw she was very surprised with the letter that Cobra read out from Lily, and it resulted in Cobra's death, so it definitely is looking like that. But anyway, thank you very, very much for watching. As always, like and sub, and drop a comment with any other examples, because there's thousands out there that I didn't include just for the sake of the length of the video. And I am going to follow this up with more prehistory and Void Century long form content where I'm going to discuss how the world came to be, including underwater volcanoes mixing with pyrobloin, which creates land and displaces water, which will lead us onto another video which is about flooding. So some of you might have already seen a preview of that. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Consider becoming a member and getting exclusive content or features, or joining our Patreon and having some influence on creative decisions. As always, if you manage to reach this far, I'm going to send you Kuma's Bible. So be yourself, free yourself, and peace. So now we know why the One Piece world is called the Blue Planet, but what makes flooding in the One Piece world so interesting? The reason is because of the mysterious true history that's submerged beneath it. In other words, changes in sea levels could hide or reveal key locations and relics of the ancient past, such as clues to the location of Laugh-Tale. This is already foreshadowed by the underwater relics of the old world, such as Noah and Impelled Down. These are the types of artifacts that make up the complex true history, as well as provide us with clues to various other One Piece mysteries, such as the underwater kingdom in Jinbei's cover story. It's fair to assume some of these sunken locations could be enormous, seeing as the recent panel we cut away to during Vegapunk's speech depicted a massive structure that dwarves even the Sea Kings. This gives credence to the idea the ancient kingdom is somewhere below the sea, but it still likely has some conditions that need to be met in order for it to be accessible. This may be partly why Roger was at Laugh-Tale at the wrong time, as water levels were yet to rise, as predicted by Vegapunk. It's worth noting Roger's crew have traits that suggest they knew about an upcoming flood, such as Rayleigh being a shipcoater. This also goes for some of their other relationships, such as Tom building a sea train. In One Piece, the theme of flooding isn't new to the story. Clues have been hidden since as far back as Longring, mainly in its geography, but also in the Davy Backfight trials, where we see turbulent currents and a strange tall flick of land. Other geographic examples include the contrast between old and new Wano's altitudes, the high plateaus of Drum Island, the submerged Eve Tree, and the raised city of Zo. Furthermore, these themes have been included in characters and their dreams, like I mentioned with the puffing Tom, and Tom wanting to make Water 7 float, echoing Thriller Bark. There are other spicy features to the whole flooding motif, however, one of which is crazy subtle, but Oda likely knew exactly what he was doing. If I asked you, does the world government have global control? Many fans would say yes, but the truth is they control Paradise, parts of the New World, have barely any presence on Sky Islands, and virtually no presence under the sea, highlighted by the fact Shirahoshi, the embodiment of Poseidon, was for the most part left alone or not identified by the world government despite being an ancient weapon. Now, what if I asked you which One Piece characters have names relating to planets? You'd think the Gorosei initially, right? But there's also Neptune. And Neptune lives under the sea, which is somewhere the government has little control and has been posited to rise, threatening available land. In other words, it's possible the Gorosei are actually increasing the risk of compromising their own authority if they cause a flood, because as it rises, so does the power of the sea with it, such as the undersea inhabitants and resistance, etc, etc. Ahoy there, fellow One Piece nerds, it's Den Kushi, and as always we're about to bust open the secrets and mysteries Oda's been keeping from us, while at the same time explaining the importance of the upcoming flood motif that's been talked about for over a decade in the community. I see a few comments saying that we're under subbed, so make sure you fix that now and subscribe, and in return I'll click your like button. Anywho, without further ado, let's get into this undersea spice. Did you know every 1,000 years underwater volcanoes in the One Piece world erupt, causing new land to be formed? This new land displaces water, which leads to floods that wipe out the history and technology of that time. But 1,000 years ago, something much, much bigger happened, again removing the true history of the world, but this time on an unprecedented scale. Emu is another force that suppresses technology and history from advancing past a certain level, but why? The answer goes back to this global catastrophe 1,000 years ago that was bigger than any before it. More specifically because the disaster was caused by human technology, or in other words, it was man-made. This technology blasted a hole in Eni's lobby, grazed the core of the planet, and came out of the other side, creating Reverse Mountain as an exit wound, you could say. Disturbing the core in this way caused the volcanoes, and particularly the underwater ones around the equator, to erupt on an unprecedented scale, which created the Red Line, breaking up land and flooding the majority of land that remained. But how do we know this? Well, firstly, we see throughout the story that many locations have both high and low areas that are shown below and above the ocean. Oda made a point of this with Longring Longland, an island greatly affected by tides. Similar to Water 7, an annual event affects the local sea levels, leaving some otherwise hidden parts of the island above water. This allows the inhabitants to travel over land to different parts of the island, kinda like a migration. This is also a regular and routine thing for the locals of Longring Longland, meaning they are a nomadic people. This idea is intentional from Oda and is particularly spicy because of the island's ties to Joy Boy, as covered by myself, Dak, StrawHatLucas in previous videos, and could also suggest that Joy Boy and his people were nomadic. The fact the island looks like a crown when the sea is at a certain level is likely significant, as is the fact it's the 7th island the Straw Hats visit. Now, since Vegapunk's revelation to the world that there would be a great flood, we can take the themes associated with Long Dong Shlongland and search for clues on a larger scale. Wano is raised high above sea level. Because of this, the country is effectively annexed from the rest of the world unless a secret path is used. Wano from a top-down view seems inconspicuous, but looking from side on, we see a strange shaped island seemingly showing different levels at different depths. In Wano, we learnt that there are underwater ruins from the Void Century years ago, which can still be found deep within the base of Mount Fuji. Pluton is said to be down there also, alongside 3 poneglyphs. However, in order to access these places, the water level currently on Wano needs to be lowered. This is stated to require physically breaking down the surrounding walls, subsequently letting water pour out into the sea. This is likely a direct parallel to the Red Line, as we see yet another ring of land restricting sea levels. We know 800 years ago the water level was significantly lower, as stated by Kazuki Elder Sukiyaki. So here again we're seeing an example of an island with varying degrees of elevated land and sea levels. Not only this, but submerged below the water is the true history, in the form of an ancient weapon and a few poneglyphs. Robin had it revealed by Sukiyaki to her some truths about the world, which again shows us the connection between the true history and being submerged. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen a sunken kingdom that's been abandoned by people and since inhabited by giant sea creatures, all of which are usually found on land. This is the submerged structure Oda showed in Jinbei's cover story. The mysterious structure shares the same markings that can be found on Kuma's clothing, but there's a subtle difference between the pawpaw marking and this one. Could this be an ancient sunken kingdom of the Buccaneers? The kingdom was thrown onto land, which is likely a reverse of what truly happened to it originally. Also, for restoring the kingdom, Jinbei is given a poneglyph by the now friendly sea creatures, demonstrating to the reader the connection between the hidden true history and the undersea. So in summary, again, we see secret history hidden underwater, there's a poneglyph underwater, and both of which are thrown onto land, which is a reverse of probably what we're going to see in the Void Century history. That said, it's important to understand in One Piece some clues to flooding may instead appear above sea level. Alabasta, the home of the most important royal family in the story, the Nefertaris, has many connections to the sea levels, highlighted for example by the sea cats, but I'll touch on the sea cats in a second. The giga significant location during the arc is the underground crypt. Hear that? Underground crypt, where yet we find another secret poneglyph in a situation where Robin goes deep underground, very similar to Wano, and discovers some true history. What's interesting about this poneglyph though is this time the poneglyph contains the location of Pluton as opposed to true history, but Oda doesn't miss a trick, and he had Robin read out some of the true history to Crocodile regarding the hero of Altea, Mamudine. This name is now more significant than ever because of Emu calling herself Mu. I do want to point out that Wizard of Oz is an expert in the connections between the kingdom of Mu and One Piece, which is an Atlantis-style myth, which definitely seems relevant at this point. So, to summarize, under the current sea level there lies a secret tomb where we learn some secret history in Alabasta. But that's not all. Alabasta is littered with references to flooding. Most cover pages Vivi features in also features animals, plants or objects that have a relationship between water and land, such as otters, lilies and watermelon. Cats are usually found on land, but in Alabasta we see sea cats that have potentially adapted due to changing sea levels. This is probably what Oda's going for with the sea cats in Alabasta. It's also a sea cat that took Jinbei to the underwater kingdom I mentioned before. As you can see here, the map shows all the relevant locations at the time of the arc. Notice something strange. The capital is raised from the ground as if there was once water around there, which weirdly enough also matches the capital in Wano amongst other locations. Crocodile's dance powder featured heavily in the arc, which is used to displace water, leaving only dry desert, and we also saw Smoker use a ray machine at the end of the arc. One more nuance to the Alabasta arc which no one wants to talk about is Zoro did fall to a lower level when he came across the poneglyph. That never happened. But let's move swiftly on to somewhere else before someone finds out I said that. Now let's look at a more obscure example with the snow-covered Drum Island. Immediately when arriving at Drum Island's North American based scenery, we see what Oda calls the Rockies, and Luffy climbs them at one point. At the top of the tallest drum of land, there is a castle, a peculiar place for a castle to be built, considering how difficult it would be to build and live so high up while being segregated from society. Of course, this is echoing the idea of Marie-Joie, but perhaps this ties to higher sea levels also. The top of the Rockies would act as small islands, almost like a microcosm of the current seas, or Wano's layout. Drum Island also has ties to the concept of the Will of D, as well as Kureha's secret to youth, so again more references to the true history. The Will of D goes back to the Void Century alongside Joy Boy and likely the Gomu, the devil fruit eaten by our protagonist. The fruit is symbolically represented by its onomatopoeia 56. And on our introduction to the island Water 7, it featured a large 5 and 6 written on the walls referencing this, demonstrating already some subtle ties to Water 7's relationship with the true history. We see another connection shortly after with the blueprints of Pluton. During the Water 7 arc, we find out the sea level is steadily rising and that Water 7 is in fact built on top of previous versions of the island that sank. For some reason, my spider sense tells me that Impelled Down may be described as something similar, that it was originally one floor and it's been built on top as the sea levels increased. But anyway, Iceberg discusses making Water 7 a floating island to avoid the Aqua Laguna, which floods the city annually, causing all sorts of issues for Water 7's inhabitants. This is reminiscent of Thriller Bark and may tie together officially later. Water 7 is known for its shipwrights, and so Iceberg and others probably do have the skills to float an island and even navigate one, so maybe we will see that towards the end of the story, Water 7 being made to float. In one scene, we see Elbaf for the first time. Well, at least the bottom of it. We see a tree, and the shot suggests the tree is absolutely massive, comparable even to the biggest places and creatures in One Piece. What makes this significant is that we know giants are from Elbaf, and that giants don't engage much with the rest of the world or their politics. Elbaf is like Wano, separated from the rest of the world. This could very well be because of the altitude at which Elbaf resides. Changes in sea level or any other form of flooding seem irrelevant to an island of this scale, which could be the reason why the world government fails to control the strength of the giants. Later on in the story, we visit a location that appears to have found a very different way of dealing with high tides. Zo is a city sitting on the back of an elephant several kilometers above sea level. The city itself portrays a similar circular design we've seen before with Alabasta, Wano, Water 7 as mentioned, as well as some others such as Goa Konoha Kingdom, Amigasa Village, and Shundora. Due to Zunisha's height, virtually no change in sea or weather conditions affect the city. As for connections to the true history, not only does Zou house a very significant poneglyph, but the city also features the iconic whale tree. Both whales and trees are connected to Joy Boy, as we saw with his debut panel featuring both whales and the sea forest. The history of the mink and Zunisha, as well as Zou itself, is at least 1,000 years old, and definitely appears to be placed on Zunisha's back for a particular reason. So again, we're seeing a culture that's protecting themselves from flooding, yet has a load of true history. It's understandable that people would choose to build up high if they were aware of the damage the sea is capable of. We get a taste of this with Whitebeard's Rumblefruit, a character that was noted to be able to destroy the world. The reader saw Whitebeard cause 2 tidal waves that would have completely submerged Marineford if not for Aokiji turning them into ice, something that may have also happened centuries ago. In fact, we also see tidal waves with Big Mom in Whole Cake, the Aqua Laguna, and also in the scenery in Wano. During Kaido and Big Mom's demise in Wano, we saw seawater mix with magma, which led to a huge explosion, and interestingly, we also see magma and ice abilities affect each other in Marineford, causing the ice to melt and liquid water to form. Again, this is all likely foreshadowing for the true history that will be revealed, particularly seeing as water is so distinctly dangerous to devil fruit users. The red line, a rock formation described as impassable due to its height, is further evidence flooding ties to the true history, as we can assume whoever decided to move up the red line did so due to the threat of increased sea levels. It's at Marijois, the readers hear that Gorosei mention a cleansing. A cleansing is synonymous with a flood, both mythologically and symbolically, particularly pertaining to the Bible. Now, under the ocean, we see this again with Noah, based explicitly off Noah's Ark, a biblical myth about a great cleansing via global floods. This suggests that some parties do know of upcoming floods and have made plans accordingly. I did want to add that on the way down to Fishman Island, Oda showed a ship go down because it flooded, and I thought this is a really nice little nuance from Oda, demonstrating the irony that not even people under the sea are immune to the effects of flooding and are still vulnerable to its damage. But now let's talk about what main potential ways the real world ties are caused by Earth's moon, so this may include some involvement from the Fairyverse Enel went to. Now, even in our own world, we are all well aware of the dangers of rising sea levels as climate change takes its course. Holland, for example, is under the realistic threat of being submerged over the coming decades as it sits just 1 meter above sea level. This is the level the sea in the One Piece world was said to rise by after using the Mother Flame on Lelesia. The One Piece story, although surreal, is grounded in a sense of logic and reality, and thanks to Shanks and Buggy arguing, we know there is a North Pole and a South Pole in the One Piece world, so Oda could dive into the real-life concept of global warming. This would go together well with theories about there being a pole shift that happened many years ago in the One Piece universe. Evidence of global warming can be found with the Mother Flame, which was held in a liquid, assumably to keep it cool. I've got a video on why Emu used the Mother Flame so close to Marijois, in which I go into detail about the reason why Emu chose Lelesia. In summary, it states that the Mother Flame as an energy source would heat up the surrounding area, affecting sea levels in the One Piece world. However, there are other possibilities to the cause of the specific flooding Vegapunk. Though an entire ocean, it seems unlikely that Oda would bring this in so directly, bearing in mind plot devices such as dance powder he could use instead. It could be a variation of a water fruit, however, such as a rain god fruit, connecting to the mentions in Skypiea. This possibly explains Vivi seemingly summoning rain when she screams, so maybe the ability to control water isn't from a devil fruit, but instead a lineage factor or some kind of haki. Weather manipulation ties to Nami's abilities, Wavaria where she was trained, Big Mom and her homies, and lastly the major battles where we see the sky split. I mentioned channeling is another way to affect sea levels. This would be done similar to a lock in a canal. For example, if Poseidon was used to break a hole in the red line, this would allow the neighbouring seas to mix, ultimately causing chaos in the adjoining oceans and their tides. Yes, it's possible this could have happened in the past during the Void Century and was covered up. Lastly, we have the possible of changing tides, which which could definitely be caused by many things such as the Lalesia incident or other similar strikes. We also have underwater volcanoes and again even great battles like a Marineford that seem to affect the sea. In the real world, however, the moon plays a dominant role in our tidal changes, and we do have a moon in One Piece, so we may yet see Enel and the Fairy Verth make a comeback, seeing as we have an idea of who has built High, Marijua and Elbaf. Emu currently resides at one, and we've just had it revealed Joy Boy's connected to the other. Emu is alive, Joy Boy is dead, Emu's name backwards is C, so it's likely that Emu and Joy Boy do play central roles in all of this. I theorized recently Emu is the manifestation of Earth with a hate for humanity. User forgets, but the devil fruit remembers. Long Ring Longland. It's been called one of the worst arcs in the One Piece story, but in my opinion it is a theorist's goldmine. I'm here today with StrawHatLucas, captain of the last arc, so get your tinfoil hats for this one as we take a trip into why we think Long Ring Longland will be one of the most important islands in the endgame of One Piece, as well as how it ties directly to resolving the recent flooding. Why are we seeing Tonji on his stilts again? Why does this island look like a crown? All this and more, so let's get into it. Long Ring Longland, introduced in chapter 303 of One Piece, presents unique geological features and could play a crucial role in the upcoming changes in water levels within the world. The location consists of tall, ring-shaped islands that cyclically rise above and fall below water due to tidal changes, exposing the land during low tide and submerging it during high tide, which was shown in chapter 305. This distinctive feature hints at a connection to ancient mechanisms, suggesting that the cyclical nature of the islands might be part of a grander system that regulates sea levels globally. The idea that Long Ring Longland's tidal changes could be indicative of a larger system from the Void Century aligns with various points in the story hinting at Emu's use of flooding. For instance, chapter 507 introduces Weatheria, an ancient island capable of weather control, indicating the existence of technology that can affect large-scale environmental changes. Furthermore, in chapter 967 in Odin's logbook, we discover that the time on Laugh-Tale was not right for Roger and his crew, potentially again suggesting Laugh-Tale also affects the world's geography, such as sea levels. Historically, the One Piece world has faced environmental challenges addressed through many different means, such as Noah's Ark in chapter 628, which was built to rescue Fishman Island inhabitants. In the present narrative, chapter 1060 reveals the world government's anxiety over ancient weapons such as Pluton, which again could alter or influence sea levels. These historical precedents and the world government's fears suggest that the ancient mechanisms for controlling the environment might still be relevant to this day. Recent chapters have provided foreshadowing for significant environmental changes. Chapter 1072 featured Vegapunk discussing the impact of the Mother Flame on current environmental stability, while chapter 1080 touches on the Red Line's potential alteration, which could drastically affect sea levels and how people navigate the Grand Line. These hints suggest that Long Ring Longland's cyclical tidal changes might be more than a local phenomenon. They could be part of a model or safeguard within a larger global system for managing sea levels. Again, this is all echoed by Water 7 and the Aqua Laguna, which in filler was explained to be the reason for the tidal changes at Long Ring. Moreover, Long Ring Longland might serve as a test site for ancient tidal control mechanisms. Its unique nature could be a deliberate design by the ancient kingdom or someone along them lines to demonstrate or experiment with different sea levels on a smaller scale without causing global disruption. This idea is supported by chapter 966, where Odin's exploration hints at ancient civilizations experimenting with environmental control, for example with Wano, and chapter 1010, which discusses poneglyphs. It might be on the poneglyphs where we get the specific details of how Long Ring Longland came to be. And it's also probably important to bring up that Long Ring has some resemblance to the Red Line, as it's a long ring that ties to changes in sea level. In the story, we see Tonji says to Luffy, "Good to see you again." However, obviously they've never met. Now, this is a nod to the fact that the people go around the islands continuously, so he's going to assume that inevitably the person that he's seen before. Now, this is also a little hint to the fact that Joy Boy and Luffy are the same person, and Joy Boy we can assume is connected to Long Ring Longland through the Gomu stretch ability, which happens to those who go on the island. Incidentally, it only happened to the Straw Hats that said they were afraid to step foot on the island, which is Chopper and Usopp. But anyway, let me give this back to StrawHatLucas to keep cooking on one of the spiciest islands in the entire series.
Thanks, Dennis. Bringing even more validity that the stretching is unnatural are the inhabitants of Long Ring Long Land themselves. Animals are elongated, and so is all the local flora. Tanjit's head is bulbous, which counts for something, I guess. Nonetheless, I don't think I need to play coy with what I think affected Long Ring Long Land, because once again, I'm not the only one who's ever said this. But it's the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. Now I see you there, typing in the comments. StrawHatLucas, why are you just regurgitating things said by other theorists? Because, dear viewer, when multiple people reach the same conclusion, chances are there's something to it. That said, I am going to be upfront as to why I've brought you here today. Remember those tinfoil hats? Now's the time to put them on. Ready? I believe fully that the island of Long Ring Long Land is actually a mechanism that will be cranked by Luffy in a move where he actually becomes a gear, and how Tanjit led to Luffy's fruit awakening. Now don't click off. I promise, this is about to get spicy. I'm talking about spice melange, baby. Before I explain why I think Tanjit is one of the strongest pieces of evidence to this thought, let's go into how I got to this way of thinking. Even before the flood was confirmed, there were multiple talks of it in One Piece communities. Little bits of headcanon here and there or theories, and I found it quite interesting, but what I found more interesting was the draining of the sea. That maybe the original level of the land was actually what we know today as the seafloor. As we saw in the destruction of Leloucia, the sea level rose, and it made me think, what if Imu had done this so many times in the past, it caused this displacement of the sea levels? With the flood confirmed, it makes me also think that Imu would be intentionally trying to flood the world. Maybe they knew that a flood was to come, and even knew it would be Joy Boy or Nika who would cause it, but they themselves are trying to force the flood so they can take the credit. You see, once the flood was confirmed is when the final pieces of the puzzle clicked together for me. The flood is only the first step in turning the world upside down, and I believe the gear of Long Ring Long Land will be the final. I believe that in Joy Boy's time, it was found that for the world to be free, a great flood must happen. I think Joy Boy wanted to be the one to do this, but he was unable to. So, he set up the next inheritor of the Nika fruit to do so, Luffy. Leaving poneglyphs and his story to Luffy on the final island, his Laugh Tale. One of the places he must have set up for his successor is Long Ring Long Land. As I said at the beginning, the evidence of it being directly affected by the fruit is just too strong. I think Imu also wants to do this because they believe if they cause the flood, they can control the world after the event, not realizing it's the beginning of the dawn. So Luffy causes the flood, but how and why? The how part, I actually don't know yet. It's always hardest to predict things that are happening sooner than later in One Piece, and as we are getting to the end, the field is wide open. The why? Maybe he wants everyone to become pirates so they can be free. That's very Luffy-like, right? So let us know in the comments down below what you think about how and why Luffy will flood the world. The next step in this hypothetical plan of mine is destroying the Red Line. After the flood, almost all land masses will be sunken beneath the waves. Only islands with high altitudes will have a chance of having land to stand on. I believe the Noah will be used to not only evacuate Fishman Island, but a large portion of the world's population as well. This will be necessary to save the people and to keep the fishmen safe as the rubble from the Red Line crashes to the bottom of the sea. I believe that the Red Line falling into the sea will cause some of the floodwater to disperse, filling the hole where it was as chunks of it fall into the sea, creating new mountains. But more land will be needed, and that is where Long Ring Long Land comes in. It's time for me to spill the beans on Tanjit. One last thing though, do you remember what Kaido said about awakening? It's when the user's mind and body catches up to the goal of the Devil Fruit. I believe the jumping off point, the beginning of Luffy aligning with his Devil Fruit, was when he arrived at Long Ring Long Land. As Luffy stepped off the ship and saw the dog and the long apples, I believe something stirred deep within the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. It began to remember the purpose of this land. Then we meet Tanjit. I believe that Tanjit is a stand-in or a mirror for Luffy's fruit, truly meeting him for the first time. The first thing that Tanjit said to Luffy is, "It's nice to see you again," even though he had never met Luffy. He then goes on to explain how everyone there on the island feels free, so they naturally grow longer and taller. Very Gear 5th-esque, right? As I said, I'm not the first person to point that out, but even looking at Tanjit's design, it seems to be pointing towards Gear 5th Luffy. His sleeves and his robe are adorned with white sun-like symbols. His robe is the same yellow Luffy wears around his waist. The band around Tanjit's waist is also the same color as the Nika fruit. I think with utmost certainty that this meeting with Tanjit is what caused whatever stirred inside the Nika fruit that led to it remembering its goal after so long. That goal being liberation. Maybe the word that came to mind for the fruit in Long Ring Long Land after this stirring was gear. And it's after this, in the Davy Back fight, that Luffy faces Aokiji and starts to develop Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd. Going past that, after this potential alignment of Luffy and his fruit is when things started to go crazy for the Straw Hats. Water 7, Enies Lobby, Thriller Bark, Sabaody, Marineford. After this last bit of fun with the Foxy Pirates and facing defeat by Aokiji, maybe Luffy and the fruit's wills began to align and he realized he had to become stronger and quick to reach his goals and to reach the fruit's goals, causing the whirlwind of events that happened from Long Ring and on until the time skip. Now let's get back to after Luffy destroys the Red Line. As I said, land will be needed for this new world. Maybe with the flood receding from the destruction of the Red Line, Long Ring Long Land will be exposed enough for Luffy to align once more with the fruit, using a move probably titled something along the lines of Gum Gum Dawn Gear or just Gum Gum Gear. I could completely see the absurd power of Gear 5 contorting Luffy's body into the form of a gear and working himself into the spaces between the points of Long Ring Long Land. And with 10 points, it leaves a spot for each of the Straw Hats and one more, most likely Vivi in my opinion, to stand and support Luffy as he turns the gear of Long Ring Long Land and begins to pull the islands of the world out from beneath the flood and back together. Luffy literally becoming a continent puller. I believe the mechanism was created on the land of the ancient kingdom just before it sank into the sea, a last-ditch failsafe by Joy Boy to make sure it could be recovered. Maybe once it's pulled from the sea, the ancient kingdom will be akin to Thriller Bark, a floating island, but this time big enough to house the world's population. Maybe the placement of Thriller Bark after the events of Water 7 and Enies Lobby tell us what we need to know in a way. Going in reverse, Enies Lobby showed the might and espionage practices of the world government. Water 7 showed a constantly sinking island, leading to only the top parts sticking out, which ties to how I picture Long Ring Long Land sits on top of the sunken kingdom. I think the concept of this floating ancient kingdom or continent could also tie into the popular theory of Luffy's true dream of throwing a party with everyone in the world. If all the islands of the Grand Line were brought together with the remnants of the Red Line to make a supercontinent, he could gather everyone in one place. A small headcanon of mine I would love to add here is, if Luffy does throw a party for his big dream, I want him so badly to go giant form and play the drums of liberation on the drum Rockies, and with the idea of the supercontinent, everyone could hear it and dance into the dawn of the new world. I hear you saying, how do the islands break from where they are? Well, maybe with the help of the ancient weapons. Maybe because of the earthquakes Blackbeard will most likely cause in the endgame of One Piece. And maybe turning the gear causes sort of a waypoint to tell everyone where to go. All of the places that seem to be flood-proof, like Thriller Bark, potentially Water 7 if Iceberg can make it float, Laboon, everyone would see this beacon and know where to go, adding more to the supercontinent. Adding even more evidence to the stretching of Long Ring Long Land and maybe how Luffy will wind himself up to turn the gear or mechanism, let's look at a bit of spice pointed out by the lovely and wonderful navigator of the last arc, 3 Day Trip. Looking at the points of Long Ring Long Land, it's almost as if they are the spots where Joy Boy's giant fingers dipped into the earth and then began to pull the land of the ancient kingdom up to the new level of the sea. Or maybe even where he was holding on to the ancient kingdom as it sank to the ocean floor. If you are having trouble picturing it, I made this image as a reference. The points would have been made as he pulled his fingers out of the land. I can imagine it having a comical pop to it, if I'm honest. In my opinion, it seems Joy Boy and his crew planned out how this was all going to go down to some degree, and who knows, upon hearing Joy Boy's laugh tale, maybe Luffy will get upset and feel he was cheated out of a real adventure. And his crew will remind him that the adventure was still real, and that's how Oda will troll us about the friends you made along the way. I really can't say. It's definitely food for thought, and even if you don't agree with what I said, I hope it was, in the very least, entertaining. As ridiculous as it sounds with Gear 5th, I think we need to look at the story with a much wider scope, especially when it comes to not only what Luffy is capable of, but what Oda himself is capable of writing.
So, there's some information from StrawHatLucas. Make sure you sub right now to his channel. Now, some last minute points before we tie all this together. Will of Fire from the TLA Discord mentioned an Archimedes screw, or a similar mechanism that could theoretically be employed to affect sea levels, which to me gives off very strong Long Ring Long Land vibes. An Archimedes screw could be used to drain or redirect water, potentially protecting islands from flooding, or conversely causing strategic flooding to impact enemy territories. Such a device could be pivotal in a storyline which so heavily involves environmental control and warfare. I've always found the fact that the island looks like a crown to be pretty spicy as well. It makes me think it was once located just above the original Jaya, meaning the Pirate King's skull had a pirate crown, which is fitting for an island so intensely connected to the histories of the world. I've speculated Jaya was a part of Laugh-Tale and Long Ring Long Land was a part of Jaya, so it would not surprise me at all if Long Ring played a major part in the endgame resolution here. Furthermore, the Crown Chakra is the 7th chakra and Long Ring is the 7th island the Straw Hats visit together. The nomadic vibes we get from Tonji and the pale horse motif from his companion are both relevant to core themes of the Void Century and Emu, so with all this in mind, I'm definitely hoping for some big payoff with Long Ring.
If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you want to hear more from me, go check out my YouTube channel, where I just launched an unscripted series called Rambling Addiction, where I give my free thoughts on different anime and manga, and of course, One Piece. Once again, I've been StrawHatLucas, captain of the last arc, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Hello everybody. This video is going to be quite a bit different than my other videos. This is unscripted. I'm not going to monetize this, and I am more than likely going to delete it further down the line. The reason I'm making this video is because I have found what I believe to be a very important discovery that is going to end up proving my 31 crewmate theory true. I have most of the puzzle figured out, but there are some pieces that I still need to figure out. All of the information in this video is eventually going to be made into a proper video on my channel. However, by the time I make that video, I want to have all this information, or at least as much as I can, figured out. This discovery has heavily to do with Goro Owase, and I am not a Japanese speaker. If you, or any other One Piece fan you know, do speak Japanese, especially if you're a native speaker, please send them this video, have them join the Discord, which I will link in the description. Any sort of help will be appreciated. However, even if you don't speak Japanese, you can still understand all the information that I go over in this video. And later in the video, there is going to be a part where you do not need Japanese to help. So any input would be appreciated. Please comment down below if you've figured out something that I haven't, or something like that. Now I'm going to give a very basic explanation of Goro Owase for people who don't understand what it is. Essentially what you are doing is dividing words into different parts and assigning those parts numbers based on how they sound. They are based on the Japanese, Chinese, and English pronunciations of these words. For example, if we go into the English ones, wan, su, suri, fo, faibu, They're just the English numbers with a Japanese pronunciation. And for example, here we go. 5, go. 6, mu, gomu. That's why Luffy's devil fruit is 5-6. Now I'd like to go over a Goro Ase pattern that is confirmed by Oda through this SBS. This reader realized that all of the current crew's devil fruits each use a digit from 1 to 10, except for 2, 9. This is why it is such a popular theory that Vivi will get Kuma's devil fruit. His devil fruit is 2, 9, and many people think Vivi will be the 10th and final Straw Hat. So this completes the crew in a way. Now on top of this, when you add up all of these numbers together, you get 325, or San-ni Go, Sunny Go. This has been known for a long time and is another reason that people were so sure that a 2-9 devil fruit would join. They just didn't realize that Luffy is the 2-9 with Nika. However, the full name of the ship is the 1000 Sunny Go. This fits in perfectly with Goro Ase because all it really is changing these words into numbers based on whether the number is actually in the word. 1000 works as 1000. The current crew, the crew that we spent most of the series with, is Sunny Go. But the final crew, the 31-man crew, is going to be 1000 Sunny Go, or 1325. And think about it. I don't know about you, but when I first heard the name of their ship, 1000 Sunny, I thought, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? It doesn't mean anything. Why isn't it the Going Sunny as a tribute to Mary or something that actually makes sense? Well, it does make sense once you put it in the proper context. This was a hint for the full 31-man crew way back in Water 7. Now, if it was just this, I wouldn't say that this is confirmation of this happening. However, this 1000 Sunny Go number also ties into something else very important that I've realized. Now, those of you who have watched my previous videos will know the importance of the number 11. It is the sun, the moon, the earth, and the 8 other planets, which I believe is a very key part to what the One Piece is, and why Luffy is a sun god. So, there are 11 celestial bodies. Well, let's look at some of these Goro Ase numbers. Luffy's devil fruit, Gomu, 5 plus 6 equals 11. The other name for his devil fruit, Nika, 2-9. 2 plus 9 equals 11. Yami, Blackbeard's devil fruit, 3 plus 8 equals 11. 1000 Sunny Go, 1325. 1 plus 3 plus 2 plus 5 equals 11. And finally, Hitotsunagi, the Japanese title for the One Piece. Now, this one is either 1127 or 1271, depending on how Oda wants to stretch it, honestly. However, both of these numbers, when you add up all the digits, once again equal 11. This is part of the reason that Oda chose these names for Luffy and Blackbeard's devil fruits, as well as the 1000 Sunny and the Hitotsunagi. This is what connects them all. And it's 2 1s for that reason. It could have been 1, I guess, but that would be very limiting, so Oda bumped it up to 2 1s. It could also be symbolic of 2 pieces coming together, like how the universe is fractured and it needs to be made whole. So what I believe Oda is trying to do with this is that the full 31-man crew at the very end of the series will equal 1000 Sunny Go, or 1325. However, at Laugh Tale, some crewmates are going to be missing, and I also believe that some people may get devil fruits after Laugh Tale happens. When Laugh Tale happens, I believe that the devil fruits of the people at Laugh Tale with Luffy will equal Hitotsunagi. Now, I have gotten 2000 Sunny Go using the crewmates' devil fruits that I have here. However, I believe that is a fluke. honestly. So let's go through this really quick. Now, you'll notice that some of these numbers have parentheses and some of them do not. The ones in parentheses are where you have to stretch it in order to make it work. We know that Oda is okay with doing this because Nika doesn't perfectly translate to 2-9, but it's definitely there. However, what I've found is that the only crewmates that perfectly translate to Goroase are the first 10 crewmates, Luffy through Bonnie. Everyone else, you have to stretch it a little bit in order to make it work, and that's why I believe me getting to 1000 Sunny was a fluke. I believe that some of these have to be wrong. I don't understand Japanese. Maybe there is some cultural context that I don't understand. I am just trying to do the best I can to get these correct. Now, I'm going to slowly scroll through these now so that everybody can clearly see what I have so far. If anybody has any sort of insight or anything they would like to add, please let me know. It would help a lot in order to figure this stuff out. Now, there are quite a few variables that make this hard to figure out. For example, Momo essentially has Kaido's Devil Fruit. However, Kaido's Devil Fruit's model is Azure Dragon. Momo is not an Azure Dragon. He is a pink or peach dragon. So it is more than likely that his model is Momoryu, which is Peach Dragon. However, we will not truly know this until Oda decides to reveal what the model name of Momo's fruit is. Though honestly, the models may not even count towards this, but I'd like to be safe and see what I can get with it. The only people on the crew with Devil Fruit models are Luffy, Momo, and Yamato, so they might not even matter outside of Nika. Now, this is the main part I need help with. If you do speak Japanese, please join the Discord. It would help out tremendously. However, this next part of the video, anybody could help out with, even if you don't speak Japanese. So if you have any insights, please let me know. This discovery was actually pointed out by a commenter a few months ago, and I'd like to thank them for starting the train of thought that led to this realization. And that realization is that the 8-2 rule that I previously categorized the crewmates in is actually the Hito Tsunagi rule, 1127. Now the 8 and 2 together obviously equal 10, while the Hito Tsunagi number equals 11. However, the extra 1 is the ship that Luffy gained in each sea. Then the remaining 10 crewmates are split between 1, 2, and 7. Now, for a lot of these, I have figured out where each of the 10 crewmates fit into this pattern. However, there are some that I'm having more or less trouble on, and that's what I would like help with, figuring out who fits where. I also believe I have found another criteria that fits the Hito Tsunagi rule. I believe this extra criteria is whether or not they were introduced as an enemy or an ally of the Straw Hats. Now, I'm going to focus on each sea individually, but I would first like to get one rule out of the way, and that is what I previously had as the sex of the crewmate, but now I realize is the gender of the crewmate. I previously categorized this as sex because sex is biological while gender is what you identify as. I worded it that way so that Yamato could be considered female in order to fit the 8-2 rule, and his Vivre cards seem to back me up on this. However, now that there is an extra 1 in each of the Cs, it's clear what Oda's doing. There is one transgender or non-binary crewmate in each sea. In Paradise and the New World, these crewmates are obvious. Bentham is closer to non-binary, while Yamato is female to male transgender. In the East Blue, I believe there is going to be a male to female transgender character, Sanji. Now there is quite a bit pointing to Sanji becoming a woman. However, most of that I'm going to go over in the video where I truly go over all this information. From now on, we're going to focus on each sea individually so we can focus on a certain set of characters at a time. I'm going to start with the East Blue, and I'd like to start by saying that Buggy may be here to fix any inconsistencies. He is the wild card. He might be able to sub in for somebody where the rule doesn't quite fit. Starting with class, I believe the 3 odd men out are Zoro, Sabo, and Sanji. Zoro is a Shimotsuki, and they were daimyos and samurai in Wano. They weren't quite royalty, but they were nobility. On top of that, samurai were like knights in that they were warriors working under a lord with increased social status. What I believe Oda's trying to do is have Zoro fill that role with Luffy. Zoro is going to be the vassal of the Pirate King. Sabo is also in a weird place because he was nobility, not royalty, when he gave up his position. However, Stelly is now the king of the Goa Kingdom, so Oda could consider him nobility or royalty, depending on how he wants to do it. Sanji is obviously royalty, so it's either going to end up being 2 nobility and 1 royalty, or 1 nobility and 2 royalty. Moving on to the race of the crewmates, the 1 is definitely Sanji, and the 2 is Usopp and somebody else. Sanji is biologically modified, but otherwise he is a human, so he is the 1. Usopp is most likely part of the Long Nose tribe because there's a Long Everything tribe at this point. And the second person could be anybody. It could be he could make Gaimon part of the Moss-Headed tribe if he wants to. It also could be Buggy as part of the Red Nose tribe and he subs in for somebody. On to the Devil Fruits. The 2 are 2 Logias in Sabo and Smoker. And the third, somebody's either going to have to get a Devil Fruit or Buggy has to sub in. I'm guessing if somebody does get a Devil Fruit, it's either going to be Helmeppo or Gaimon to give them a little bit of a power boost. It most likely will not be a Logia, though, because either a Zoan or a Paramecia would be the 1. Moving on to the new Allies and Enemies rule, 7 of the crewmates were introduced as allies in their initial introduction. 2 were enemies, Helmeppo and Smoker, and the 1 I believe is Tashigi, because she initially seemed like an ally to Zoro until we found out she was a Marine. Moving on to Paradise, we'll start with the class. We have 2 royalty in Vivi and Mr. 2, who is now the queen of the Nakama Kingdom. I suspect the 1 to be either usurped royalty or nobility, and I suspect it's going to be Law because he's a D-Clan member, and because I believe he's supposed to be the pirate prince to Luffy's pirate king. Moving on to the race of these crewmates, this actually fixes a little bit of a problem I had before. Before I said it was any combination of 2 between Chopper, Brook, and Frankie. Now it's a little more clear. It's Chopper and Brook are together as people who are only human because of devil fruits, and Frankie is a cyborg, so he's the odd man out. The devil fruits in Paradise are actually very clear-cut. There are 7 Paramecias, 2 non-devil fruit users, Vivi and Frankie, and 1 Zoan, Chopper. When it comes to the allies and enemies, 7 of these were introduced as enemies, 2 were not, Chopper and Brook, and the 1 is Mr. 2 because he initially was very friendly with the Straw Hats and genuinely was their ally because he did not realize they were on opposing sides. Moving on to the New World, I believe that the class of these crewmates is going to be 7 royalty, 2 usurped royalty, and 1 non-royalty. When I first made the 8-2 rule and released my first video, Tama was not revealed to be a Kurazumi yet, and when she was revealed, I figured, even though she was a Kurazumi, she never lived like royalty. She was actually probably the most impoverished out of any Straw Hat, so I believe she counted as a commoner. However, now I believe that her role is a usurper, like Yamato. The Kurazumi overthrew the Kazuki, and in turn, the Kurazumi got overthrown by Kaido. That leaves the 1 as the only commoner, Jinbei. When it comes to the races of the New World crewmates, I believe there are 7 non-human races, 2 humans, Momo and Tama, and 1 celestial dragon, Bonnie. I believe she is also meant to represent the Buccaneer race, where even though she is not one of them herself, she was raised by one and carries on their legacy. Now, the devil fruits of the New World are a bit tricky, and I think it's going to end up being one of 2 options. As of right now, these crewmates have 5 Paramecias, 2 Zoans, Momo and Yamato, and 3 non-devil fruit users, Shirahoshi, Jinbei, and Carrot. Now, before I said that Carrot would get Kuma's devil fruit, I'm not as sure about that anymore, but I am sure she's going to get a Devil Fruit, mainly because Jinbei and Shirahoshi need to swim, so that makes more sense than anything. However, that would leave 6 Paramecia users, 2 Zoans, and 2 non-Devil Fruit users, which does not fit the pattern. So the way I see it, there's one of 2 options. One, there is only 1 Devil Fruit I could see Jinbei getting, and that's the one that his Seraphim has, the Swim Fruit. If Jinbei gets that, we would have 7 Paramecias, 2 Zoans, and 1 non-Devil Fruit users. The other option is that the classification of Devil Fruit is not what separates these crewmates. If this is the case, then Bonnie is the odd one out because of the way she got her Devil Fruit. She did not eat a normal Devil Fruit, she got it passed down from her mother and it gave her a disease. It was a much different situation than any of the other Devil Fruits. Momo's Devil Fruit may have been artificial, but it was for all intents and purposes a normal Devil Fruit. It did not have any extra side effects like how Bonnie got her powers. If this is the situation, then the 2 are Jinbei and Shirahoshi as non-Devil Fruit users, and the 1 is Bonnie as getting her Devil Fruit through abnormal means. Finally, we have the enemies and allies of the New World. We have 7 people that were introduced as allies, 2 that were enemies, Boa and Bonnie, who specifically said she was Luffy's enemy, and then the 1 is Pudding, because she acted like everybody's ally, but in reality was plotting against them. Okay, that's all of the information. Like I said, if you have any insights or maybe something I have missed about any of the things I'm trying to figure out, please comment below, join the Discord, and like I said, if you know any One Piece fan that speaks Japanese, please send them this video. It could be a tremendous help and help prove this whole thing. I'd also like to clarify that the only part of this information going into the remake of my first video has already been figured out. So this isn't going to delay the remake of the 10 crewmates per se video at all. All of the information I go over here will be in a separate video. Thank you all for listening, and peace.